Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you are joining us. I'm very excited to introduce our special guest today, Emmy Lowe. Emmy is a consultant for emotionally intense and highly sensitive people. She's the author of Emotional Sensitivity and Intensity and The Gift of Intensity. Emmy focuses on working with emotional intensity, high sensitivity, and giftedness. Emmy, it is such a pleasure to have you joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Good to see you again.
Likewise. I even just the titles of your books make me feel so excited because they are things that people that are listening to this recording are struggling with, are looking for support with. So before we dive into The Gift of Intensity, tell us a little bit about your work and how you came to do it.
Sure. So, such a long story. So I started out as a therapist. Nowadays, I'm expanding my work, and there's a component of coaching and consulting. Many years ago, I started out as a social worker, and then I became a psychotherapist and an art therapist. And I, in the clinical world, specialized in working with people who struggle with regulating their emotions. But then in my work, I begin to see these threads. I can see how a lot of people who are emotionally sensitive or they feel a lot are often being misunderstood and marginalized. Some people may think that they are attention seeking or that they are just not trying hard to manage themselves, which is not true. Begin to learn that actually some people are actually just probably born more sensitive. And then I also see how a lot of them are also very bright. So drawing all these threads together and also highly empathic, very bright, very empathic, very sensitive, drawing all these different threads together helps me to refine my understanding of human nature and the kind of people that I like to work with. And so I created Eggshell Therapy and Coaching, working with people who identify as being emotionally intense, sensitive, and some of them gifted, emotionally gifted as well. If you want, I can expand a bit on what I meant by emotionally intense. Okay, so emotional intensity is a term that hasn't been very much researched. I think it's a trait that is found in a few populations, including the highly sensitive persons, as coined by Dr. Elaine Aron, empaths, which is a very popular term now, and people are beginning to understand this phenomenon, and intellectually gifted people, which is something that has been known for a long time. People talk about IQ, but actually not a lot of people have spoken about gifted adults. Most of the resources focus on children. And actually a lot of very intellectually gifted people also have emotional sensitivity and emotional intensity. So what I say is the emotionally intense person has the following 5 dimensions of characteristics. I probably can briefly describe them without going into a lot of details. And if people are interested, they can go to my website. So the first one is emotional depth and passion. The second dimension is deep empathy and sensitivity. The third dimension is they are highly perceptive. The fourth dimension is they're usually very imaginative and they have a rich inner world. And the fifth is creative potential and existential angst. To say a bit more, maybe they have always identified as being an old soul, like as compared to their peers, they seem to think a lot. And people around them would say that to them, why are you always thinking so much? Why do you feel so much? Oh, stop being so dramatic. So they probably have heard that all their lives. They experience emotions really powerfully, big up, big down, both positive and negative are to big degrees. And they're very empathic when other people around them feel upset. So they seem to also feel it. Now, there are science around this, mirror neurons and everything, which I have also written about. But it's true that some people are more susceptible to pick up other people's feelings. So sometimes we call them empaths, which we can go into another thread of discussion, because the truth is everyone has empathy. Just because you're not empath doesn't mean you don't have empathy. So the word itself means very specific thing. So emotionally intense people are usually also very perceptive. They are very keen observer of what's going on around them, other people's feelings, even subtle dynamics. Like maybe they can tell this person doesn't like that person, this person fancy that person. So they can pick up all these little signals because they are so highly attuned. But because they are so aware and pick up so much information from around, they can also feel quite exhausted. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Listening to you describe that, it's like you're describing me, this emotionally intense person. I'm curious if you are also emotionally intense. How would you describe yourself based on these different, I love these different breakdowns that you just gave us. Do you identify with all of those personally?
Me personally, not all of them, but I identify with some of them. Yes.
Yeah. And I would imagine that, for you to do the work that you do, you've got to identify with some of them, right? To be interested. It's like working in this field, it's so immersive and it's fairly intense. I would imagine for you working with emotionally intense people is an intense experience for you as well.
Yeah, it can be. Yes.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say that I loved the way that you were just describing that not all people that have empathy are empaths, right? That there's a difference between it. And I like to also kind of clarify that not all people that have sensitivity are highly sensitive. We all have sensitivity. We all have empathy. It's like it's a spectrum, right? And so highly sensitive people fall higher on that spectrum of how much sensitivity they have. Is that how you would qualify an empath also, that they fall higher on the spectrum of having empathy for others? Or would there be another qualification that you would put towards?
So I don't call myself an expert in empaths. There are people who, Judith Orloff, for example, Dr. Judith Orloff, they really specialize in this. I just find an overlap in the observation between people that I work with and people who are empaths. My suspicion is, they do pick up a lot more signals from around them. And so they have this feeling that they absorb other people's emotions.
So I'm thinking that many people listening to this are saying, just like me, yes, that's me. And I'm also thinking that other people listening to this, like me, have some residual trauma, maybe from their childhood. And I of course, I can only speak for myself. I grew up in a loving family, in a family that was well-intentioned. And yet I still had trauma from my childhood that I had to really work on and move through in order to grow into what I like to call an emotionally healthy adult, into an adult that can regulate my emotions, because I do have very intense emotions. What you were just saying, these high highs and these low lows. So I'm wondering if based on your practice and your work, if you have any insight about why intense, sensitive, empathic people might have familial trauma and sort of the spectrum of that, right? From these loving families that maybe leave us with some trauma to these more complicated families where trauma was really overt and in your face.
Yeah. So maybe I can start with talking. So I think a lot of traumatic dynamics are actually not visible. They are emotional, they are covert rather than overt. And a lot of the times it may not be because someone has maliciously done something wrong. Our society very much understands like physical trauma when you have wounds. We understand sexual trauma, which is terrible. But sometimes what is not often talked about is emotional trauma, psychological trauma, things that happens in very toxic family dynamics that we don't see. For example, some of us may have heard of things of being scapegoated, a term that's very popular nowadays is gaslighted. Emotionally intense people have intense needs as well. They have strong emotions, they're sensitive. If parents don't have a good understanding of their traits, or the parents themselves are not sensitive, it could be really challenging for them to have an understanding of their child. And so even if they try really hard, they may still inadvertently hurt their kids by saying, don't cry so much, or, be a boy, grow up. Things like that can hurt a lot. There are also certain family dynamics that are quite commonly found in kids that are sensitive, intense, empathic. One of which being, for example, parentification, just a mouthful. So parentification is basically a term that describes it when the roles between parent and child are reversed. So when the child has to act like a little grown-up in the family, maybe as their parents' therapist, friends, confidants. You see this when parents seem to involve the kid a bit too much in their inner lives, seem to share a bit too much, to treat them as a friend rather than their child. Or maybe the relationship between the parents are a bit distant, and so one of them may form an ally with the child. So we call this triangulation as well. But so then the child doesn't feel like they have the opportunity to be just a carefree, playful child. They have the burden of being their parents' confidant, of always have to worry about their parents. And this pattern can really affect them, and they can bring this into their adult relationship where they always feel like they need to be taking care of the other person. For example, there is a lack of separation between who they are and who other people are. Sometimes the parents just, they don't want to have created this, but maybe they are vulnerable, maybe they're struggling with some kind of difficulties emotionally, and so their vulnerability would cause the child to want to step up and protect them, because children really want to protect their parents. So this is parentification. It can have lots of implication, like, growing up, you may find it really difficult to say no, you may find it difficult to separate yourself and others, you find it difficult to see other people in need and just not jump in and help.
I was going to say, I think sensitive people in general have a tendency to do that, right? Because we're able to see the big picture. When we see somebody in need, we want to step in and fix it for them because we can see what needs to be done. And so I can see how if somebody was raised in this sort of environment, that desire would be amplified for them and maybe even more intense.
Yeah. So there's that. And then obviously sensitive kids need quite a lot of sensitive attunement. They need their parents like, okay. The normal things parents do, but they probably need to feel attuned and heard. And sometimes some parents are not able to do that. Again, not because they're bad, but because they are preoccupied. Maybe they're struggling with poverty financially, or maybe they have a neuroatypical traits themselves. So their unresponsiveness or blankness can really, really hurt a child because they take it personally. Mommy doesn't want to listen to me. I must have done something bad. Daddy's not interested in me. Maybe I'm not interesting. So these empathic children grow up to have little self-esteem, even little sense of self, because no one was there to mirror to them who they are. There's that. And then on the flip side, you can also become overly closed, overly immersed. Like, it's a little bit like the parentification example earlier, but different in meaning that they are too close. So the child always feel like, oh my God, I have to be responsible for making this person happy, that my mother or my father happy. If they are not happy, I'm also not happy. This can come from parents, maybe because of their own attachment wounds, holding on too tightly to their kids. And so when their kids want to go out and be independent and do their own thing, parents feel like some parts of them feel, oh no, I'm losing this baby girl, baby boy. And so they inadvertently, through their actions, shows the message, the hidden message that, oh no, don't go. If you go, I can't live without you. If you go, I will be very depressed. And so the kids feel compelled to stay around or take care of the parents, take care of their emotions and everything. So these are some prominent examples of familial trauma that is quite commonly found in sensitive empathic kids.
Wow. So it sounds like there's really a kind of broad range of the way that the woundedness can get imprinted or planted in someone. Yeah. And because we don't have that much time, I want to sort of leapfrog from where the wound starts to what do we do about it? Okay, so if we've grown up and we've had any of these experiences and we're aware that we've had it, right? Because it seems like that's really sort of one of the first pieces for an adult to to repair whatever wound was sort of given to us in childhood. Let's just take a leapfrog to, okay, so now I'm an adult and I'm aware that I have this wound, but I don't know what to do about it. Naturally, I would imagine that you, because of your profession, would say, yes, some work with a therapist would be really beneficial.
Sure.
And I'm one to get on that train too. I think therapy, especially for sensitive people, is really beneficial. And maybe you can speak a little bit about the why of that. And I'm also wondering if you can speak a little bit to what that therapy might look like. As an art therapist, I would imagine that you use different modalities than most people are used to. Can you just speak a little bit about how to get the ball rolling in that healing direction?
Okay, so much I can talk about this. I think therapy is beneficial because it creates a space where you could ideally be you and be attuned to. And sometimes in certain types of therapy, there's a process that is almost like parenting. You feel reparented. Obviously, the relationship is different, but the nature of it is you get what you didn't get in the relationship. And so you have that experience of being able to trust someone and being able to express yourself. So some of the healing goals might be to locate or develop an internal sense of safety, because I think a lot of people who are traumatized don't feel safe in their own company. They feel very chaotic with their own emotions. They feel they don't have a handle on their own emotions. So some of the goals might be to find a way to help them cope with their emotions, becoming more aware of them, and to have a connection with themselves rather than not. And we talked about empath earlier, so something around boundaries, from both interpersonal relationship boundaries to energetic boundaries. That would be good. I think people who are sensitive could really benefit from relational-based therapy, meaning that the relationship between you and the therapist is a part of the work, rather than the therapist give you a set of skills and worksheets, and then you go do that, and then you bring back your homework. And that's also beneficial. That's more skills-based. It's more like you go in and learn something, but a relational-based one is you actually learn something from the experience itself, which is scary as hell. Especially if you have been traumatized, having to trust another person again, having to maybe even imagine that this person can be trusted and we're going to have a, albeit still a therapeutic relationship, but it's still a relationship. It's still scary for people who have been betrayed, have been abandoned.
I've heard from many sensitive people that they've had bad therapeutic experiences where they've worked with a therapist who maybe didn't understand their sensitivity. And so I would imagine even for some people, trusting a therapist after a bad therapeutic experience could be an additional layer of challenge for them. So I've never actually thought about that before, about how the relationship with the therapist is a piece of the healing of the therapy. I'm so glad that
it's crazy because that is exactly what you need. That is what you need, and it's what you're the most afraid of. So the thing that you're afraid of is your medicine, which is a conundrum, which is difficult. But if you can get through the initial hurdle and find someone that you can truly trust, then profound healing can happen potentially.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I'm curious for you as a therapist, and I don't know if this is too personal of a question, I hope not, if for you it ever feels vulnerable working with a client, do you ever feel that that sense of personal relating from a professional side that can be a little bit challenging or a little bit vulnerable or tenuous?
Challenging in what way?
To be a safe space for them, to be able to show up for them in the way that they need to meet them where they are.
It can be if they have a huge amount of needs that sometimes I feel one person couldn't meet it all. But the job is to remind me that it's not my job to fill it all. It's to do as much as I can. It's to, it's professionally love, but love as much as I can, to be there as much as I can. And certain things is not up to me. Yeah, it can be challenging at times. Sometimes I tell myself it's not necessarily me that's doing the work. I'm just kind of a tool, more like a vessel. And the client is really doing a lot of the work.
Yeah, I would also think as a sensitive person, it's got to be very rewarding to be able to be that vessel, to create this safe container for somebody to be able to do that healing and move through, to be the person that they're able to trust, maybe for the first time in their life.
Yeah.
So for those that are listening who are thinking, that all sounds really good, what else can I do besides therapy? Or I've tried it and it didn't work for me, or I can't afford it, or I don't have the time to commit to it. Do you have a, I don't want to call it a quick fix because there are no shortcuts, that's why we do
not
that we do. But maybe just like a little process or something that somebody can use to tap in to the experience of feeling a bit of healing, or tap into looking at a particular wound or a thread of woundedness, like kind of what you were talking about earlier, and have a little insight or a little bit of movement, or maybe even feel a little bit of inspiration to want to do the deeper work from diving in a safe way. Anything that comes to mind that people can tiptoe into?
Well, first of all, beyond therapy, there are lots of things people can do. They can read books, they can go online to do online courses, they can consult someone who have knowledge in their area. There are brilliant coaches around. It doesn't have to be this, but I do understand, a lot of people are reluctant for all sorts of other reasons. If I were to prescribe some little taster exercise that people can try, I think when we talk a bit about family dynamics and family trauma, I think it's always a good fun exercise, well, not necessarily fun because it can be quite difficult, but review old family albums. I sometimes ask clients to do this in the beginning of the work, where they bring back some old photos of their family members, different occasions, different things, different themes, sometimes parties, sometimes just normal gathering, etc. And really reflect on the relationship between people. Who are you the closest to? Who are the closest to in that? Who has the most power? Who might be scapegoated? Who plays what role? Like, who is the class clown? Who is the king? Who is the black sheep? And how has this relationship affected you? Who do you go to when you're sad? Who do you go to when you're happy? Who are you afraid of? Just really look at these pictures and drill it down. So that's often very good and insightful, and really gives you a new perspective of what has happened actually. And this kind of exercise is not super confrontational, but it kind of starts the ball rolling.
Even as you were posing those questions, without even looking at family albums, I was starting to think about, family members and dynamics, and think, I've never thought about it in that way. I've never thought about who was the black sheep, who was the scapegoat. And even as you were saying it, I'm thinking, wow, yes, because every family, it's sort of the construct of what a family is, And even as you were saying that, I was thinking about some of the classes that I was in, the grades that I was in growing up. And I'm thinking, wow, those are like little mini families, these little constellations that come together and fall apart. And how, many sensitive people have trauma from school, from classmates, from
absolutely
social experience. And it almost sounds like there are these parallel structures that are going on in our lives. And it's how did we fit into this structure that can really be a source of that wounding.
For sure. It's also important to ask questions like, who do you feel safe with? Who are your portal? And apart from your relationship with them and your dynamic, there are also these things called family norms, where a certain family has a way of doing things. So some questions I often ask is, does this family express anger? Do they express sadness together? Or some family doesn't even allow happiness or humor. And I ask questions like, what happens if someone breaks something, if someone spills the milk? What happens if someone has a need? What happens when someone is vulnerable? So these things could often bring up the norm, the ritualistic behaviors that a family normally has.
Yes. Even as you're talking about that, I'm thinking, yes, some of the families that I work with, it's like we just pretend emotions don't exist. We just don't express them at all. And I would imagine that for the emotionally intense people growing up in a family like that is just crazy making. It's got to be absolute crazy making to feel so deeply and be surrounded by people who pretend that that's not a facet of life. It would almost be like living in like an orange grove and family members pretending that we don't smell, and you're saying, oh, it smells delicious over here, and oh, that fruit over there is rotten, and they're saying, we don't know what you're talking about. It can really set up a paradigm of internal distrust.
Exactly. Yeah. So these things don't just disappear.
Yeah. Okay, I have one more question that I've been dying to ask you, which is, I love the title of your book, The Gift of Intensity. Can you just give us one gift as an intense person? Give me one little morsel of something that I can identify with as, here's one of the gifts that comes with being emotionally intense or sensitive, intense to our sensitivity in the way that we're experiencing life.
Everything has two sides. When it's a gift, it does come with its troubles, but people who are emotionally gifted and very sensitive can feel beauty, and they can be moved by art and movies to a really, really deep level. They see beauty everywhere, and they almost feel this rupture, transcendence feelings where other people say, it's a flower. What are you talking about? So they're more likely to have these transcendental experiences. So that's one.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Sometimes I just need a reminder, just a little reminder that that everything is a spectrum, and that not everybody feels the beauty of life in the way that I do. That really is the upside that comes with feeling all of those unwanted, intense emotions. Emmy, you're such a wealth of knowledge. Can you share how people can work with you, learn from you? I know that you've written a couple of books. Can you tell people how that they can find them and access more information online?
Sure. So I'm transitioning to doing a lot more consulting and coaching these days. My practice is called Eggshell Therapy and Coaching. So the domain is www.eggshelltherapy.com. And so you can find me in Amazon as well. My first book is called Emotional Sensitivity and Intensity. And the second one is also coming out has also come out in audiobook. It's called The Gift of Intensity.
Thank you. I wanted to tell you that you said there were so many incredible things that you said today, but one that really resonated with me was that you said something like, a lot of people who are traumatized don't feel safe internally. And I've never really thought about that before, about how growing up with trauma in whatever way it manifests, especially if it's this emotional, psychological trauma that sensitive people seem so susceptible to experiencing, that there can be this internal unsafety, that it's not even based on the world, but it's just kind of living inside of us. And just hearing you say that felt like a validation that it's normal, that it's okay, that it's almost like expected if you are this emotionally intense person growing up in that environment. So I appreciate you highlighting that and spotlighting it. I know for me it feels soothing to hear. I'm sure that for others as well.
Thank you.
Any last thoughts or tips that you want to leave our listeners?
You are absolutely a wonderful interviewer. You're really good at asking the right questions, showing your enthusiasm, and then giving the space for me to share. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Emmy. It's always a pleasure talking with you, and I so appreciate your time and insight and wisdom. And I want to thank you for a really wonderful session, and I want to thank everybody for listening to us today. Bye for now.
Thank you.